Hello viewers, I am Stella RANI, Assistant Professor of English from A.D.M.COLLEGE for Women Autonomous, NAGAPATTINAM. I am going to take the subject Translation Theory and Practice 1. Let's see Introduction to Translation. The English word translation has been derived from the Latin word translation, which itself comes from trans and Latin together, meaning a carrying across or a bringing across. In other words, it is the business of carrying across a message or written content from one text to another, from one person to another, and from one language to a different language. It's called target language. It can happen within the same language or between languages. It is best seen as a communication process where the transfers of a message or written content from one language into a new language take place. However, poets engaged in the job of translation often think of translation as interpretation, taking a view, bringing to life, or transformation. Whatever may be its meaning, every act of translation involves the expression of sense. A translation is a text that is considered to be different from the original text. It's otherwise called the source text. But it is also a fact that the source text and the translated text are the same in terms of the sense they convey. It is often said that translation gives new cloth to a piece of writing by putting it in a different form. This interactive relationship between source and the translation goes on in the hands of mature translators of prose and dramas, but it is the best in poetry. Let's see the definition of translation. The language that we translate is called source language, that is SL. The language into which we translate is called target language, that is TL. Neither call it as a receptor language, that means ORL. The original text is source language text. It's otherwise called SLT. The translated text is target language text. It's called TLT, or receptor language text is called RLT. It is not easy to define translation exactly. It has been defined differently by different scholars in different places in different points of time. Let's see Nida's definition of translation. Translation is a process by means of which a person who knows both source language and the receptor language decodes the message of the source language and encodes it in the most appropriate form in the receptor language. Let's see the Roman Jacobson's kinds and uses of translation. Roman Jacobson, in his article on linguistic aspect of translation, distinguishes three types of translation. First one interlingual, and second one interlingual, and third one intersemiotic translation. Let's see the interlingual translation. It is an interpretation of verbal signs by means of other signs in the same language. For example, prose rendering of a poem in the same language, giving the meaning of an old text. It means the same language but a different genre. Next, we are going to see the interlingual translation. It means of verbal sign by means of some other's language. For example, translate from one language into another language, like Tamil into English or from English to another language. Let's see the intersemiotic translation. It means of verbal sign by means of signs of non-verbal sign system, because it's a verbal art into music, dance, cinema, or painting. It means without word translation. Of these three translations, studies in concerned with the second type, that is the interlingual translation, only that describe the process of transfers from SL to TL. We are going to see the Dryden's methods of translation. Dryden, the famous English poet, was also a great translator. In his preface of Fables and preface to Ovid's epistles, he identified the following three types of translation. First one is metaphrase, paraphrase, and imitation. Let's see metaphrase. What is metaphrase? It is the faithful rendering of the original. The equivalent of each word is found out, and all the words are translated. It is a word for word translation. For example, Ben Jonson's translations of Horace, The Art of Poesy. Next, paraphrase. This is not faithful to the original. The translator does not bother about the equivalence of words, and all the words are not translated. For example, Waller's translations of Virgil's Aeneid. Next, imitation. This is not the faithful to the original. The translator does not bother about the equivalence of words. He takes a lot liberty with the original, the liberty to vary the form, the words and the sense. For example, Cowley's translations of the Odes of Pindar. Next, we are going to see the Catford classifications of translation. In his book, A Linguistic Theory of Translation, Catford defines translation as the replacement of textual material in one language, SL, by equivalent textual material in another language. Catford classifies translation on the basis extent level and rank as full translation and opposite of partial translation, total translation and opposite of restricted translation, and last one, rank-bound translation, it opposite of unbounded translation. Let's see full translation. It means the whole text is translated but in partial translation. Some parts of source text is not translated. Next, total translation. Catford classifies translation into total translations and restricted translations on the basis of levels of language involved in translation. In total translation, SL grammar and SL lexis are replaced by target language grammar and target language lexis. Both the consecutive replacement of SL phonology and graphology by target language phonology and graphology. Phonology cannot be separated from graphology and these from lexis and grammar. It is the coming together of all these that makes a meaningful sentence. So total translation is not possible. Next, we are going to see the restricted translation. This type of translation replacement takes place at only one level, as features like lexis cannot be separated from others. Restricted translation is impossible. Next, rank-bound translation. On the basis of rank in a grammatical hierarchy, translations are classified into rank-bound or rank-free or unbound translation. Translations are rank-bound only at word or morpheme rank. They set up word-to-word or morpheme-to-morpheme equivalent. Machine translations are rank-bound, or word-for-word translation. Free translations are unbounded. Next, Catford talks of other translation like phonological translation, graphological translation, and grammatical translation and lexical translation. First, we are going to see the phonological translation. It is a restricted translation in which SL phonology is replaced by equivalent TL phonology, but with no replacement of SL grammar and lexis. Next, phonological translation. This is also a restricted translation. Here, SL graphology is replaced by equivalent TL graphology, but with no other replacement. Next, grammatical translation. This is restricted translation where SL grammar is replaced by equivalent TL grammar, but with no replacement of lexis. Next, lexical translation. It is otherwise called literal translation. This is a kind of a translation with where words are literally translated. It is a verbally exact reproductions of the original both literally and syntactically. Literal translation is a word-for-word translation. It is also called as interlinear translation. The translator searches for the equivalence of all words. Next, methods of translating. There are three methods of translating. One method gives importance to the author, the other to the text, and the third to the reader. There are author-centered translation, text-centered translation, and reader-centered translation. Let's see author-centered translation. These types of translation stresses the primacies of translator's familiarity with the author. It helps him to guess the intentions of the writer of the original text. If the author belongs to the period in time where the translator has direct access to him, then it is author-centered translation. If there is enough information available to help the translator arrive at the author intention, then it is author-centered translation. Expressive text or author-centered because they expresses the mood and the tone of the author. For example, autobiographies, essays, personal correspondence, political statements, and speeches are the author-centered translation. Next, we are going to see the topic text-centered translation. In this type of translation, the text is more important. In a legal document or a treatise on science, the intention is to convey the truth and make the readers well informed. So they are text-centered translator. All types of fact-oriented, scientific and knowledge-based writing, text, book, reports, research reports, academic articles, and scientific literature, they are called text-centered translation. Next, we are going to see the topic reader-centered translation. In this type of translation, primacy is given to the reader and his response. The translator aims at creating an effect in the readers that is equal as the effect on the source language reader. Imperatives text that make the readers feel, think, act, and react according to the text are all reader-centered translation. For example, notices, propaganda, publicity materials, instructions, and advertisements. Next, see the types of translation. There are 6 types of translation. First one is oral translation. Oral translation is made during public speeches, orations, and discourse. In this type of translation, the transverse or interpreter knows the language of both the speakers and the listeners. Next, written translation. This type of translation is mechanical. It does not give room to the display of emotions. And third one is machine translation. It is made by computer. And another one is literal translation. In this type of translation, the original or SL text is followed closely. In the art of translation, Savory calls literal translation as ancient. Next one is paraphrasing translation. In this type of translation, the original is retained as far as possible. A paraphrase is a restatement of the original passage. It is a paraphrase by using other families or synonyms of words. Next, adaptation. In an adaptation, the original is abridged or reproductions with some alternations or modifications. For example, Dryden's All for Love is an adaptation of Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra. In the same way, B.M. Shree's Ashwathaman is an adaptation of Sophocles' Algernon. Let's see the principles of translation. Many authorities on translations have laid down what translation should undertake to do and what it should refrain from doing. Wilhelm von Humboldt says that translation should not become blatant commentary. It should not be ambiguous. It should not be based on any misunderstandings of the original text. Theodore Savory points out the adaptation should be the following things. First one is translation should read like the original and not like a translation. Second one is translation should possess the style of the original and not reflect the style of the translator. And third one is translation should read as a contemporary of the original and not as a contemporary of the translator. Next, a contemporary translator has the following qualities. A competent translator has the following qualities. A very good knowledge of the language written and spoken from which he translating. An excellent command of the language into which he translating, that is called target language. Next, familiarity with the subject matter of the text being translated. A profound understanding of the etymological and idiomatic correlates between the two languages. A finely tuned sense of when to metaphrase, that means translate literally, and when to metaphrase so as to assure true rather than spurious equivalence between the source and the target language text. Next, we are going to see the topic decoding and recoding. There are two opposite schools. One school believes that translation hereby transfers meaning from SL to TL. The other school opposes this monistic approach. For example, Levy says that translation is a conglomerate of two structures. This is the semantic content meaning of words, the genre of the original on the one hand and the aesthetic features of the receptor language on the other hand are both important in the translation process. Let's see source language. Next, we are analyzes the source text and target to transformation and recoding, and we are reaching to the target language. Next, we are going to see the definition of equivalence. Similarity in thoughts and styles between the source language text and the target language text is called equivalence. Edward Saber says that equivalence is not possible in translation because no two language represents the same social reality. Let's see various translators on equivalence. First one is Popovic on equivalence. Popovic identifies 4 types of equivalence. There are linguistic, paradigmatic, stylistic and textual equivalence. First, linguistic equivalence. It is a synonym of word for word translation. Then, paradigmatic equivalence. It lies in similarities between the grammar of the source language and that of the target language. Third one is stylistic equivalence. This is the functional equivalence of elements in both the source language and the target language. And last one is textual equivalence. This is the equivalence in form and shape. When there is no similarity in form and shape, there is no textual equivalence. Next, Eugene Nida on equivalence. Nida has divided into 2 kinds. First one is formal equivalence and second one is dynamic equivalence. Let's see the formal equivalence. The translator is concerned with the translating the form of the SL text into the same form in the TL text. For example, poetry into poetry, drama into drama, prose into prose, concept into concept. Next, dynamic translation. The translator seeks to convey to the reader of the target language the same effect that the reading of the source language text had source language text. If the SL text saddens or enlightens the translator, he tries to communicate the same saddening or enlightening effect to the readers of the target language text. Next, Catford on equivalence. In his book, A Linguistic Theory of Translation, he says by textual equivalence, he means changing a part of sentence in the target language text in accordance with the need to change a part of a sentence in the source language text. He gives an example from English and French language. Catford on formal equivalence, he says that there are a broad equivalence in some matters between some languages. He pointed out the preposition in English and French are broadly alike. Next, Roman Jacobson's on equivalence. He holds that poetry with its connotative symbolic touches is untranslatable. According to him, even an expert translator cannot work out and exact equivalence of the poet's message in SL text when translating into the target language. Next, faithful on fidelity in translation. One school demands that translator should be 100% faithful to the original. No deviations and no clarifications of the original text should be allowed. The translator should not distort the original according to the personal likes and dislikes or to suit the cultures of the target language. Next, Catford on untranslatability. There are 2 types of untranslatability, that is lexical and cultural. Let's see the lexical untranslatability. It is due to the non-availability of equivalent works in the target language. The translators like the Savory, Alan Duff and Eugene Nida have discussed this point at length. Savory pointed out that the English language supposed to be one of the richest language in the world, but lacks some very ordinary words which the other language has. He says that French word menu and a Latin word agar have no equivalent in English. Nida also pointed out the same problem. Next, cultural untranslatability. It is due to the gap between the culture of the SL language and that of the target language. There are difficulty in translating drama also. The drama usually presents many characters. Each character speaks in his distinct style. The translator must bring out these stylistic narrations. Another difficulty is that many dramas are plentiful in colloquial expressions. These colloquial expressions must be translated into equivalent colloquial expressions in the target language text. Thank you for watching. Thank you.